There is a strange paradox that Carl Jung hinted at many times in his writings, a paradox that quietly shapes the lives of people who feel too deeply, who carry inside them a gift that can often feel like a curse. These people are what we now call empaths. They see into others without effort, they sense moods as if they were their own, and they carry an instinctive ability to step into another person's inner world. But the paradox is this: the very quality that makes them a source of light also makes them a target for envy, especially from people who pretend to love them. To understand why this happens, we must begin with something Jung observed again and again in his exploration of the human psyche. He taught that people rarely see others as they truly are. Instead, they project their own shadows, fears, and unacknowledged desires onto those around them. An empath, because of their sensitivity, often becomes the perfect canvas for these projections. Their kindness makes others feel safe enough to reveal hidden parts of themselves. But this same kindness also awakens feelings of inadequacy in those who are not ready to face their own shadows. Imagine the quiet strength of an empath. They rarely boast, they rarely dominate, they rarely demand the spotlight. And yet, their presence is undeniable. People feel understood around them in a way they cannot explain. There is an invisible mirror in the empath's gaze, a mirror that reflects not only the surface but the deeper truths beneath the mask. For someone who is insecure, who is pretending, who is building their sense of worth on fragile illusions, this mirror is unbearable. They begin to feel small. They begin to feel exposed. And so, envy is born in silence. Jung wrote that envy is not simply a matter of wanting what another person has, it is the painful recognition of something missing within oneself. When someone stands near an empath, they often glimpse a depth of authenticity that they themselves cannot reach. They see someone who feels emotions honestly without shame, who can love without bargaining, who can listen without needing to steal the stage. For a person who has built their identity on appearances, this depth feels threatening. They may even disguise this envy as love, because admitting it openly would force them to confront their own emptiness. This is why empaths so often attract people who seem loving on the surface, yet carry hidden resentment underneath. The relationship begins warmly, almost magnetically, as if the other person has found someone who finally understands them. But over time, the mask slips. The warmth turns cold, the admiration turns into subtle criticism, and the person who once claimed to love the empath now begins to undermine them. What started as affection transforms into rivalry. And the empath, who only wanted connection, begins to wonder what went wrong. For Jung, the answer lies in the shadow. Every person carries parts of themselves they cannot accept, parts they would rather bury than confront. The empath, without even trying, brings these shadows into the light. They reveal them not by words but by their very being. Their gentleness disarms, their honesty strips away pretense, their openness makes hidden motives visible. And the one who pretended to love them now feels exposed, as if standing naked in front of a truth they never wanted to see. It is here that envy grows most dangerous. Because envy is not only a feeling, it is a wound to the ego. It whispers to the envious person that they are lacking, that they are inferior, that they cannot measure up. Instead of turning inward to heal, many people lash outward. They attack the one who makes them feel this way. They disguise contempt as jokes, they belittle kindness as weakness, they withdraw affection in subtle punishments. All of this is a way of saying, "You make me see what I cannot face, and I will punish you for it." For the empath, the pain of this betrayal is heavy. They trusted, they gave, they believed in love. And now they are left with confusion, wondering how someone who claimed to care so deeply could suddenly turn cold. The truth, however, is not that the empath was unworthy, but that they were too authentic for someone still trapped in their own illusions. The envy they triggered was not about wealth, beauty, or status, it was about depth. It was about the unbearable reality that the empath carried something real that the other could not touch. Jung would say that this is the cost of individuation, the cost of becoming whole in a world where most people live fragmented. The empath, without even realizing it, stands as a reminder of what true integration could look like. They carry in themselves a rare balance of feeling and awareness. And this balance shines a quiet light on the incompleteness of others. For those willing to learn, this light is a gift. But for those who cling to their masks, it feels like a threat. So the empath becomes both cherished and hated, embraced in moments of vulnerability, resented in moments of insecurity. They are told they are too much, too sensitive, too intense, when in truth they are simply too real for those still hiding. This cycle leaves deep scars. Yet it also reveals something profound. It shows that the envy an empath triggers is not a sign of their weakness, it is proof of their power. And this is where our story begins, with the quiet strength of the empath, the envy they awaken in those who pretend to love them, and Jung's timeless insight that the human soul will always resist what it fears most, the truth of itself. When envy enters a relationship with an empath, it rarely announces itself openly. It does not storm the room with anger or declare its presence in loud arguments. Instead, it creeps in silently, like a shadow that thickens over time. At first, the person pretending to love the empath seems devoted, even enchanted by their sensitivity. They admire the way the empath listens without judgment, the way they understand moods without words, the way they bring warmth into silence. But beneath that admiration, a quiet bitterness grows. Jung wrote that the unconscious mind often acts out dramas long before the conscious mind understands them. In the case of envy, the unconscious begins to reshape the relationship itself. What once felt like partnership becomes competition. Every time the empath shows kindness, the other person feels a sting of inferiority. Every time the empath forgives, the other feels exposed in their pettiness. Every time the empath's presence soothes a room, the other feels invisible. Slowly, the affection that drew them close curdles into resentment. For the empath, this change is deeply confusing. They cannot easily understand how love can coexist with hostility, how warmth can turn to coldness without explanation. Their natural instinct is to give more, to heal what feels broken, to pour themselves into the relationship in the hope of restoring what once felt safe. But this very act of giving only deepens the wound. The more light the empath offers, the more shadows it casts in the other. And so the cycle intensifies. Jung described this as the clash between the true self and the false self. The empath lives closer to their true self, vulnerable but authentic, imperfect but open. The envious partner, however, clings to a false self built on appearances and defenses. When these two selves meet, conflict is inevitable. The false self cannot tolerate being seen, and the true self cannot help but see. This is why empaths so often find themselves caught in painful entanglements with people who first adored them but later sought to diminish them. Envy transforms love into subtle cruelty. It rarely shouts. Instead, it whispers. A backhanded compliment here, a dismissive remark there, a sudden withdrawal of affection just when the empath feels most open. These are not random acts. They are unconscious attempts to regain power, to cut down the one who shines too brightly. In Jung's terms, they are defenses of the ego, desperate measures to protect the fragile illusion of superiority. The empath, however, absorbs these wounds differently than others might. Because they feel so deeply, the cruelty does not slide off their skin, it sinks in. They replay words late at night, searching for meaning. They wonder if they are too much, too intense, too sensitive. This self-doubt becomes the soil in which the envious partner plants more seeds of control. And soon, what looked like love becomes a quiet battlefield, one side fighting to maintain a false self, the other struggling to understand why love hurts so much. Jung would remind us here that envy is never really about the other person. It is a mirror turned back on the self. When someone envies an empath, what they truly envy is not the empath's life but their way of being. They envy the freedom to feel without shame, the courage to live authentically, the ability to connect without manipulation. These are not external possessions, they are inner qualities. And because they cannot be taken, the envious person often tries instead to break them. But here lies the tragedy. In trying to destroy what they envy, they often destroy the very relationship they once valued. They cut at the root of intimacy, leaving behind only bitterness and mistrust. The empath, meanwhile, walks away carrying invisible scars, uncertain of why their gift was punished instead of cherished. And yet, within this painful cycle, there is also a hidden wisdom. Jung believed that suffering, when understood, carries meaning. The betrayal that empaths experience is not simply cruelty, it is also a revelation. It reveals how rare authenticity truly is, and how threatening it becomes in a world addicted to illusions. It reveals that love, when mixed with envy, is not love at all, but possession disguised as affection. And it reveals that the empath's gift is powerful precisely because it awakens such strong responses, for good or for ill. As the story continues, we will see how empaths can navigate this paradox without losing themselves, how they can recognize envy before it poisons their hearts, and how they can walk the fine line between giving deeply and protecting their own inner light. When Jung spoke of individuation, he described it as the process of becoming whole, of uniting all the hidden parts of ourselves into a single, authentic being. For empaths, this journey is both beautiful and perilous. Their sensitivity is not just a trait, it is a doorway into this wholeness. Yet it is also what makes them so vulnerable to envy, to manipulation, to being drained by those who cannot face their own shadows. So the great challenge for the empath is this: how to protect the gift without hardening into bitterness, how to keep the heart open without leaving it undefended. This balance is not easy. Many empaths, after being wounded by envy disguised as love, retreat into silence. They learn to suppress their feelings, to hold back their intuition, to build walls where once they offered open doors. On the surface, this looks like strength, but inside, it is a kind of quiet grief. It is the grief of losing contact with their own nature. Jung warned that when we repress our true nature, it does not disappear, it sinks into the unconscious, where it twists into something darker. For the empath, suppressing sensitivity can lead to numbness, to disconnection, to a sense of being lost in a world that once felt alive. This is why the path forward is not about shutting down the gift, it is about learning how to carry it with wisdom. Wisdom begins with recognition. An empath must learn to recognize the signs of envy before it grows into betrayal. The subtle tightening in another's voice when they offer a compliment that feels sharp-edged. The small withdrawal of warmth after the empath shines in some natural way. The sense that admiration has turned into comparison. These signals are often quiet, but empaths, by their very nature, are able to sense them. The task is not to ignore these feelings, but to trust them. Trusting intuition does not mean cutting people off in fear, it means understanding the patterns of human behavior. Jung's insight into projection is key here. When someone reacts with hostility to kindness, it is rarely about the kindness itself. It is about the shadow it awakens. For the empath, this awareness can become a shield. It allows them to see that the cruelty is not a reflection of their worth, but of the other's struggle. Yet awareness alone is not enough. Boundaries are the second shield. Empaths often resist boundaries, fearing they make them cold or unloving. But Jung would say that boundaries are not walls, they are containers. They protect what is sacred so that it is not wasted or destroyed. For the empath, setting limits on how much they give, on how deeply they allow themselves to be entangled in another's wounds, is not selfishness. It is the very act that allows their gift to survive. Consider the way a candle burns. Without the glass that shields it from the wind, the flame dies out. But with protection, it can burn steadily, lighting a room. The empath's gift is no different. Without boundaries, the flame is blown out by envy, criticism, and exploitation. With boundaries, it endures. And in enduring, it continues to give warmth. This does not mean the empath must harden their heart. On the contrary, it means they can love more freely, because their love is no longer entangled in the need to be everything for everyone. It means they can give without losing themselves, they can listen without being consumed, they can shine without fear of being extinguished. In learning this balance, the empath transforms envy itself. What once felt like poison becomes a signal. It tells them when a relationship is no longer safe, when love is turning into rivalry, when the shadow is too heavy for them to carry. And instead of internalizing this as failure, they begin to see it as truth. They understand that not every heart is ready for authenticity, and that this is not their burden to fix. The power of the empath, then, lies not in avoiding envy but in rising above it. By staying true to their gift, while protecting it with wisdom, they embody the very process of individuation Jung described. They become whole, not by closing the heart, but by honoring its depth and protecting its flame. Jung believed that the psyche is always reaching for balance, even when it stumbles through pain, betrayal, or conflict. Envy, as destructive as it may seem, carries within it the seed of transformation. It is a mirror held up to what is missing in the one who feels it. For the empath, this understanding can become a kind of quiet power, the ability not only to survive envy but to transform it into an opportunity for growth. But how is this possible, when envy so often wounds, when it disguises itself as love and turns kindness into a weapon? The answer lies in perspective. The empath, who is naturally attuned to the depths of feeling, can learn to see envy not as a rejection of their worth but as a revelation of another's struggle. It is not that the empath is too much, it is that their presence touches wounds the other person has not yet healed. When viewed this way, the empath is freed from the trap of self-blame. Instead of asking what they did wrong, they begin to see the dynamic for what it truly is, a shadow rising to the surface. This awareness does not mean they must endure cruelty or remain in toxic connections. Rather, it gives them the strength to step back without bitterness, to leave without carrying the weight of false guilt. They understand that the envy belongs to the other, not to them. Jung wrote often of the shadow as a teacher. It is not an enemy to be destroyed but a reality to be faced. For those who feel envy, the empath's presence can be a painful but necessary lesson. They are confronted with authenticity in a way that cannot be ignored. And while many resist this lesson, a few will eventually turn inward, asking why they feel so threatened, why they cannot simply accept the gift of being loved by someone so genuine. In this way, the empath's very existence becomes a catalyst for self-reflection, even if the process is slow and filled with resistance. For the empath, the key is to remain anchored in their own authenticity. They cannot control whether others choose growth or denial. But by holding to their own truth, by continuing to live with sensitivity and depth, they embody an alternative way of being. And this embodiment, even when met with envy, plants seeds. Some will fall on barren ground, but others may take root in time. The empath may never see the fruit of this, but the influence remains. Transformation also happens within the empath themselves. Every time they encounter envy and survive it, they grow stronger. Not harder, not colder, but wiser. They learn to discern who is safe to trust. They learn that not every act of giving must be endless. They learn to balance compassion with self-respect. This is the beginning of what Jung might call integration, the moment when the empath is no longer only a mirror for others but also a guardian of their own soul. There is a quiet dignity in this. To be envied is painful, yes, but it is also proof of something rare. People do not envy emptiness, they envy fullness. They envy what feels whole, what feels alive, what feels real. For the empath, this realization can become a source of comfort. The envy they awaken is not a curse, it is evidence that their light is seen, even if it is misunderstood. And slowly, the empath begins to live with a new kind of peace. They accept that not everyone will meet them with love. They accept that envy will appear again and again in their path. But they also accept that their task is not to extinguish this light, not to apologize for it, but to walk with it carefully, shielding it when needed, and letting it shine when it is safe. In this way, envy becomes not just a wound, but a teacher. It reveals the fragility of masks, the hunger for authenticity, the cost of illusions. And it reminds the empath that their role in the world is not to be loved by everyone, but to live as themselves, fully and without shame. In the end, the story of the empath is not only about suffering or betrayal, it is about courage. The courage to remain authentic in a world that often punishes authenticity. Carl Jung knew that the greatest danger to the human soul was not external rejection, but internal abandonment, the moment when we deny who we truly are to fit into the expectations of others. For empaths, who so often feel the sting of envy and the coldness of false love, this danger is especially great. Yet it is precisely here that their path becomes most meaningful. To be envied is to be seen, even if through the distorted lens of another's insecurity. To be betrayed by those who pretended to love you is to discover the limits of illusion. and to carry sensitivity in such a world is to walk a road both painful and profound. The empath who survives this road without closing their heart embodies something rare. They embody what Jung called individuation, the full unfolding of the self. This unfolding is not loud. It does not demand recognition or praise. It happens quietly, in the way the empath learns to listen without losing themselves, to love without erasing their own needs, to walk away without hatred when envy corrodes what could have been. It happens in the resilience they build, not as armor that makes them unfeeling, but as wisdom that keeps their gift alive. The greatest irony is that the very quality that awakens envy, the empath's authenticity, is also what grants them peace. Because while others struggle with masks and shadows, the empath has already accepted what is real. They know the language of feelings. They know the depth of silence. They know the cost of love. And in this knowing, they find a freedom that cannot be taken away. Jung believed that the task of life is to become who we are, to bring the unconscious into light, to live not as fragments but as a whole. For empaths, this task is both their burden and their gift. They carry the weight of being misunderstood, of being envied, of being wounded by false love. But they also carry the gift of seeing into others, of holding truth gently, of embodying the wholeness that so many seek but cannot find. And so, the journey closes where it began, with the paradox of being an empath. Loved and resented, cherished and envied, healed and betrayed. Yet through it all, the flame remains. A flame that may flicker but does not die. A flame that lights the shadows not to shame, but to reveal. A flame that reminds us all of what it means to be fully human. In the end, the empath does not overcome envy by changing others. They overcome it by staying faithful to themselves. They learn that their worth is not diminished by the shadows of others, and that their light is not responsible for the darkness it reveals. They learn that true love does not punish authenticity but honors it. And they learn that their path, though lonely at times, is sacred. So if you are an empath, and you have felt the envy of those who claim to love you, remember this. Their envy is not proof that you are unworthy. It is proof that you carry something real in a world that fears reality. It is proof that you hold a mirror many cannot bear to face. And it is proof that your heart, though wounded, is still alive, still capable of love, still capable of truth. And perhaps this is what Jung wanted us to understand most. That the journey of the self is not about avoiding pain, but about transforming it into meaning. That even envy, even betrayal, even heartbreak can be woven into the tapestry of growth. And that to live authentically, despite it all, is the highest form of courage a human being can show.